The floor of the warehouse was slick with blood, but Enzo Ferraro did not care. He stared at the severed finger of the cartel lieutenant and dialed a number. "You touch a single soft curve on my wife," he whispered, "and I will burn this entire city to the ground." The penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan was a fortress of glass and steel, a fitting throne room for Enzo Ferraro, the head of the Chicago syndicate. Enzo was a man carved from ice and violence. He ruled the Midwestern underworld with ruthless efficiency, keeping the rival families, the politicians, and the feds firmly under his boot. He was not a man who felt warmth, nor was he a man who tolerated weakness. Yet every Tuesday and Friday, the undisputed king of Chicago found himself sitting at his mahogany desk, pretending to read shipping manifests just so he could watch Lydia Greco. Lydia was the maid. She was 24, drowning in a mountain of medical debt left behind by her late mother and working 3 jobs just to keep her small apartment in the South Side. In a world populated by razor-thin supermodels and plastic socialites vying for Mafia attention, Lydia was profoundly different. She was a plus-size woman, unapologetically chubby, with thick thighs, a soft, plush stomach, and a gentle roundness to her face that made her look like a Renaissance painting brought to life. Her hands were calloused from hard labor, but her eyes held a quiet, unbreakable steel. Enzo was utterly obsessed with her. He watched the way her soft curves moved beneath the modest grey uniform she wore. He noticed how she never flinched when his imposing, heavily armed guards walked past her. He saw the resilience in her posture. Where other women threw themselves at his wealth, Lydia scrubbed his floors, collected her paycheck, and looked at him not as a monster or a king, but just as a man. The crisis that changed everything began in early October. The commission in New York demanded stability in the Chicago territory, following a string of federal raids. To solidify his power, Enzo was given an ultimatum by the old capos. Take a wife, prove you are building a lasting dynasty, or face a leadership challenge. The obvious choice was pressed upon him immediately. Sabrina Moretti. Sabrina was the daughter of the Brooklyn Moretti family. She was vicious, sharp-edged, and power-hungry, a woman who viewed marriage as a corporate merger bathed in blood. Sabrina arrived in Chicago expecting an engagement ring. Enzo knew that marrying Sabrina would mean letting the Moretti venom seep into his empire. He needed a wife to satisfy the commission, but he refused to bind himself to a snake. He needed someone he could control, someone entirely disconnected from the mob. He needed a fake wife. That evening, Enzo summoned Lydia to his office. She stood before him, clutching her cleaning rag, her breathing slightly elevated, but her chin held high. Enzo did not mince words. He offered to pay off every cent of her debt, set up a massive trust fund in her name, and ensure she never had to scrub another floor for the rest of her life. In exchange, she would marry him. She would wear his ring, share his penthouse, and play the role of the devoted mob wife for exactly 1 year. Lydia stared at the most dangerous man in the city. She knew the risks. She knew men like Enzo swallowed people whole. But she also knew what it meant to starve, to freeze in the Chicago winter, because the heating bill bounced. She looked at his cold, calculating eyes and demanded a written contract, stipulating that she retained her independence and that he would never cross the physical boundaries of their arrangement. Enzo was shocked by her audacity, and it only fueled his dark fascination. He agreed. The wedding was a sudden, lavish affair that sent shockwaves through the American underworld. Sabrina Moretti, sitting in the front row, stared daggers at the altar. She was humiliated. The great Enzo Ferraro had rejected a Brooklyn Mafia princess for a chubby, poor maid with no pedigree and no power. Sabrina watched as Enzo slipped a massive diamond onto Lydia's plump finger, noting the way his hand lingered on hers. Life as Enzo Ferraro's fake wife was a terrifying adjustment for Lydia. She was thrust into a world of tailored designer gowns, armored SUVs, and charity galas populated by killers in tuxedos. Yet, she thrived. When snooty mob wives mocked her plus-size figure at a luncheon, Lydia did not cry. She smiled politely and completely dismantled their insults with a sharp, working-class wit that left them speechless. Enzo witnessed this, and his obsession deepened into a fierce, territorial possession. He began crossing the boundaries of their contract, not with force, but with quiet intensity. He fired a world-renowned tailor who suggested Lydia wear black to look slimmer, replacing him with a designer instructed to drape her beautiful, soft body in fabrics that celebrated her curves. He found himself lingering in her bedroom doorway at night, listening to her breathe. The ruthless Mafia boss was falling hopelessly in love with the maid, though his pride refused to admit it. Lydia, too, found herself drawn to the man behind the monster, seeing the exhausted, solitary king who only ever let his guard down when he was sitting next to her on the couch in the dead of night. But their fragile domestic illusion was about to be shattered. Sabrina Moretti did not handle rejection well. Returning to New York, she had fumed for months, plotting her revenge. She viewed Lydia as a grotesque insult. To Sabrina, Lydia was nothing but a fat, pathetic servant who had stolen the crown of Chicago. Sabrina convinced her father that Enzo had gone soft, that he was distracted by his ridiculous peasant wife, and that the Chicago territory was ripe for the taking. The Moretti family quietly moved their soldiers into the Midwest. The strike happened on a Tuesday, during a rare moment when Lydia was outside the penthouse without Enzo's heavy security detail. She had insisted on visiting her old neighborhood in the South Side to deliver groceries to an elderly neighbor who had once helped her mother. Enzo had allowed it, sending only 2 guards to give her space. It was a fatal miscalculation. As Lydia exited the small brick apartment building, 3 unmarked black vans swarmed the narrow street. The firefight was deafening, but brief. Enzo's guards were gunned down on the pavement. Before Lydia could run, heavy hands grabbed her, dragging her thrashing, screaming body into the back of a van. A burlap sack was shoved over her head, and the scent of chemical smoke filled her lungs. When Lydia finally opened her eyes, she was tied to a metal chair in the center of a freezing, abandoned meat-packing plant on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana. The air smelled of rust, old blood, and damp concrete. Standing before her, wearing a pristine white trench coat and a cruel smirk, was Sabrina Moretti. "Look at the little maid," Sabrina mocked, circling Lydia like a vulture. "I still cannot fathom what Enzo sees in you. You are soft. You are weak. You are nothing but a pathetic charity case taking up space in a world that belongs to me." Sabrina expected Lydia to cry, to beg for her life, to cower like the civilian she was. But Lydia had survived the crushing weight of poverty, the despair of watching her mother die with nothing, and the daily humiliation of being invisible to the rich. A pampered mob princess did not scare her. Lydia spat blood from her busted lip onto Sabrina's designer shoes. "He chose me because I am real," Lydia said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You are just a parasite waiting for a man to give you power. I never needed Enzo's power. That is why he cannot stand the sight of you." Sabrina backhanded her, the heavy rings on her fingers tearing the skin on Lydia's cheek. Sabrina snarled, promising to carve Lydia to pieces and send her back to Enzo in a trash bag. But even as the pain flared, Lydia focused on her breathing, assessing the room, counting the guards, leaning into the deep well of resilience that had kept her alive her entire life. She knew Enzo. She knew the monster that lived beneath his expensive suits. Back in Chicago, the monster had just been unleashed. Enzo was in a meeting with his underboss when his phone rang. It was the frantic, dying voice of one of his security men on the South Side. When the call abruptly ended, silence fell over the penthouse office. Enzo stood up. The glass tumbler of whiskey in his hand shattered under the sudden, immense pressure of his grip, slicing his palm open. He did not bleed. He did not feel it. The cold, calculating businessman vanished, completely eradicated by a blinding, apocalyptic rage. The Mafia boss snapped. For years, Enzo had maintained a delicate peace, acting as the diplomat of the underworld, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. In the span of 60 seconds, he threw all of it away. He walked to his private armory, his eyes hollow and pitch black. He summoned every soldier, every hitman, every enforcer on the Chicago syndicate payroll. "Find the Moretti rats," Enzo ordered his men, his voice dropping to a terrifying dead monotone. "I do not care about collateral damage. I do not care about the police. Tear apart every warehouse, every shipping yard, every safe house in the Midwest." The first Moretti lieutenant they found was dragged into a soundproof basement beneath a jazz club. Enzo did not delegate the interrogation. He took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and picked up a pair of heavy bolt cutters. The lieutenant laughed at first, spitting that Enzo's fat wife was already dead. Enzo didn't speak. He simply went to work. It was a gruesome, meticulous display of absolute brutality. He broke the man down piece by piece, stripping away his arrogance until all that remained was a sobbing, broken shell begging for death. Through shattered teeth, the lieutenant gave up the location. The meatpacking plant in Gary. Enzo dropped the bolt cutters. He grabbed his customized assault rifle. His heart, a muscle he thought had long since turned to stone, hammered against his ribs with agonizing force. The thought of Lydia in pain, the thought of someone bruising her soft skin, touching the wife he had sworn to protect, drove him into a state of sheer madness. He climbed into the back of an armored SUV, wiping the blood of the informant from his hands. As the convoy of syndicate vehicles tore down the highway toward Indiana, Enzo made a silent vow to the dark sky. Sabrina Moretti was not just going to die. She was going to experience the true depths of hell before he allowed her heart to stop beating. The temperature inside the Gary meatpacking plant was hovering just above freezing. Lydia Greco shivered, the biting cold seeping through her thin sweater, but she refused to let her teeth chatter. She kept her eyes locked on Sabrina Moretti. The Brooklyn mob princess was pacing the concrete floor, her expensive heels clicking in an erratic, agitated rhythm. Sabrina was waiting for the fear to set in, waiting for the moment Lydia would break and beg for mercy. It was a moment that was never going to come. Lydia shifted her weight subtly in the metal chair. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back with thick plastic zip ties. Her wrists were bleeding from the friction, but as she moved, her fingers brushed against a jagged, rusted edge where the chair's metal frame had sheared off. It was a tiny flaw in her prison, but for a woman who had spent her life surviving on scraps and sheer willpower, it was an opportunity. Slowly, agonizingly, Lydia began to saw the thick plastic against the rusted steel. "Do you think he is coming for you?" Sabrina asked, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. Do you honestly believe Enzo Ferraro gives a damn about a chubby little maid? He married you for optics. You are a shield, Lydia, a temporary inconvenience. By tomorrow morning, I will be the one comforting the grieving widower, and within a month he will have forgotten your name. Lydia felt the sharp sting of the rusty metal slicing into her palm as the zip tie slipped, but she pushed through the pain, continuing her steady, hidden sawing. "He will never let you touch him," Lydia replied, her voice eerily calm, echoing in the vast, empty slaughterhouse. "You do not understand men like Enzo. You look at him and see a crown. He looks at you and sees a parasite. He will kill you, Sabrina, and he will not make it quick." Sabrina stopped pacing, her face flushed with rage. She stepped forward, raising her hand to strike Lydia again, but before her palm could connect, the massive overhead industrial lights flickered violently and died. The plant plunged into absolute pitch blackness. A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the room, broken only by the sudden, frantic shouts of Sabrina's guards. Then, the silence was shattered by a sound that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their short lives. It was the synchronized, rhythmic thud of suppressed automatic gunfire from the perimeter. Outside the plant, Enzo Ferraro had not brought a strike team. He had brought an army. The Chicago Syndicate descended on the facility with the precision of a military death squad and the savagery of wild dogs. Enzo was at the front of the formation, wearing a heavy tactical vest over his dress shirt, an assault rifle gripped in his hands. His eyes were devoid of humanity. He was a force of nature, moving through the loading docks and cutting down Moretti soldiers before they even realized they were under attack. Sabrina screamed at the dark, demanding her men turn on the backup generators. When the emergency red strobe lights finally flickered to life, bathing the killing floor in a hellish crimson glow, the true nightmare was revealed. The heavy steel doors of the main chamber were blown off their hinges. Smoke from breaching charges flooded the room. Through the haze, men in tactical gear poured in, systematically dropping Sabrina's remaining guards with lethal, calculated headshots. The gunfight lasted less than 40 seconds. When the smoke began to clear, the only people left breathing were Sabrina, Lydia, and the Chicago Syndicate. Enzo stepped through the ruined doorway. The assault rifle hung by its strap from his shoulder. He drew a heavy, matte black handgun from his hip, his face a terrifying mask of cold, unadulterated violence. Blood splattered his white shirt, though none of it was his own. Sabrina panicked. She grabbed a pistol from the floor where one of her dead guards lay and scrambled behind Lydia's chair, pressing the barrel hard against Lydia's temple. "Drop the gun, Enzo!" Sabrina shrieked, her voice cracking with pure terror. "Drop it, or I swear to God I will paint this floor with her brains. Tell your men to back off." Enzo stopped walking. He stood 15 feet away, staring directly at Lydia. He did not look at Sabrina. He did not look at the gun pointed at his wife's head. He looked into Lydia's eyes, searching for a sign of brokenness. Instead, he saw the fierce, unyielding fire that had captivated him from the very beginning. He saw her chin tilt upward. He saw the slight shift of her shoulders. "I told you, Sabrina," Lydia whispered. Behind her back, the frayed plastic zip tie finally snapped. In one fluid, explosive movement, Lydia threw her entire body weight forward, ripping her bound hands apart and twisting her torso violently. Her elbow slammed backward into Sabrina's stomach with crushing force. Sabrina gasped, stumbling back, the pistol firing blindly into the ceiling. Enzo did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He raised his handgun and fired twice. The first bullet shattered Sabrina's right kneecap. The second tore through her right shoulder, spinning her around and dropping her to the concrete floor in a shrieking heap of blood and shattered bones. Enzo kicked the gun away from Sabrina's thrashing body and immediately dropped to his knees in front of Lydia. The ruthless Mafia boss, the monster of Chicago, tossed his weapon aside as if it were garbage. His hands, shaking uncontrollably, reached out to cup Lydia's face. "Lydia, look at me," Enzo pleaded, his voice cracking, shedding every ounce of the terrifying king he had been seconds prior. He frantically inspected her, his thumbs tracing the bruised, swollen skin on her cheek where Sabrina's rings had cut her. He saw her bloody wrists, her split lip, her shivering form. "I am okay, Enzo," Lydia breathed, her adrenaline fading, leaving her exhausted but alive. "I am here." "Who touched you?" Enzo asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying, guttural whisper as he stared at the cuts on her wrists. "Tell me who put their hands on you." "Sabrina did," Lydia said softly, leaning her soft cheek into his large, calloused palm. "Just her." Enzo nodded slowly. He stood up, carefully lifting Lydia into his arms. He held her against his chest, cradling her beautiful plush body as if she were made of spun glass. He turned to his underboss, who was standing quietly in the shadows. "Patch her up," Enzo commanded, gesturing with his chin toward Sabrina, who was sobbing and bleeding out on the floor. "Keep her alive. Tourniquet the leg and the arm. Then put her in a shipping crate. We are taking a trip to Brooklyn tomorrow. I want her father to watch what I do to her." He carried Lydia out of the slaughterhouse, leaving the carnage and the screams behind. As they stepped out into the freezing Indiana night, Lydia buried her face in Enzo's neck, breathing in the scent of gunpowder, expensive cologne, and the man who had just burned the world down to find her. The penthouse in Chicago was completely locked down. For 3 days, Enzo Ferraro did not sleep, did not attend a single syndicate meeting, and did not leave the master bedroom. A private trauma doctor had stitched Lydia's cuts, bandaged her wrists, and prescribed rest. But Enzo refused to let anyone else tend to her. He became her sole caretaker. The ruthless boss who had just ordered the systemic annihilation of the Moretti family operations in the Midwest was currently sitting on the edge of a king-sized bed, carefully feeding Lydia warm soup from a silver spoon. Lydia watched him from propped-up pillows. The dark circles under his eyes spoke volumes. He was a man consumed by guilt. Every time he looked at the purple bruise on her cheek, a muscle in his jaw twitched with barely contained fury. "You need to sleep, Enzo," Lydia said softly, gently pushing the spoon away. "You look like a ghost." "I am fine," he replied gruffly, setting the bowl on the nightstand. "Are you in pain? Do you need the medicine?" "I am fine," she echoed, reaching out with her bandaged hand to touch his arm. "Enzo, stop. Look at me." He finally met her gaze. The impenetrable fortress of his eyes had crumbled. What Lydia saw staring back at her was a man entirely stripped of his armor, laid bare and terrified. "I was supposed to protect you," Enzo whispered, his voice thick with a raw emotion he had never allowed himself to express. "I brought you into this life to solve a problem. I made a contract to keep you safe, to keep you isolated from the monsters in my world. And instead, I made you a target. I almost lost you, Lydia." He stood up suddenly, pacing the length of the massive bedroom, running a hand through his dark hair. The news from New York had arrived that morning. The Moretti family was in ruins. Enzo had personally delivered Sabrina back to her father, and the resulting massacre had forced the Commission to beg Enzo for peace. He had absolute power now. He was untouchable. But none of it mattered to him. I thought I could control this, Enzo continued, stopping at the foot of the bed. I thought I could keep you at arm's length. But when I heard you were taken, Lydia, my world stopped. My lungs stopped working. I would have killed every single person in this city to get you back. I am a monster. I know what I am, and you deserve a life far away from the blood on my hands. Enzo walked over to his heavy oak desk in the corner of the room. He unlocked the top drawer and pulled out a manila folder. He brought it back to the bed. It was the contract, the agreement they had signed months ago, stipulating a 1-year fake marriage, boundaries, and financial compensation. He held the thick stack of papers in his hands, and without a second of hesitation, ripped them in half. He tore them again and again, until the contract was nothing but confetti falling to the plush carpet. The arrangement is over, Enzo said, his voice trembling slightly. The debt is paid. The trust fund is yours. I have secured a private jet to take you anywhere in the world you want to go. Italy, Paris, a quiet town where no one knows the name Ferraro. You are free, Lydia. You don't have to pretend to be the wife of a killer anymore. Lydia stared at the shredded paper on the floor. She slowly pushed the heavy duvet off her legs and swung her thick, soft thighs over the side of the bed. She ignored the dull ache in her ribs and stood up, walking toward the most dangerous man in America. Enzo tensed as she approached, as if expecting her to walk right past him and out the door. Instead, Lydia stopped inches from his chest. She looked up into his dark, haunted eyes. You think you are the only one who broke the rules of that contract? Lydia asked, her voice steady and resolute. Enzo swallowed hard. What are you saying? I am saying that I am not a fragile little maid who needs you to pack her away in a glass box, Lydia declared. I grew up with nothing. I know what the real world is. I know what men like you do. But I also know the man who sits with me at 2 a.m. I know the man who fired a tailor for trying to make me look like someone I am not. I know the man who tore down an entire Mafia family just because someone scratched my cheek. She reached up, resting her warm hands on either side of his face. His breath hitched. I do not want Paris, Enzo. I do not want to hide. I want to stay right here, in Chicago, with my husband. Enzo stared at her, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her words. You are choosing this? You are choosing me? I chose you the day I said my vows. Lydia smiled softly, leaning in close. Even if they were fake to you then, they were real to me. I love you, Enzo. Darkness, blood, and all. A ragged, desperate exhale escaped Enzo's lips. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his body. He buried his face in her neck, holding on to her as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. When he finally kissed her, it was not the polite, staged kiss of their wedding day. It was a searing, desperate collision of souls. It was a vow of eternal protection, a promise sealed in the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom. He worshipped every soft curve, every inch of the woman who had conquered his black heart, not with a gun, but with her unbreakable spirit. 6 months later, the Chicago Syndicate held its annual gala. The room was filled with politicians, capos, and deadly men in expensive suits. But when the double doors opened, a hush fell over the crowd. Enzo Ferraro entered, commanding the room with his usual terrifying presence. But he did not walk alone. By his side, radiant in a deep emerald gown that clung perfectly to her lush, beautiful curves, was Lydia Ferraro. She was no longer the poor maid from the South Side. She wore the Ferraro diamonds with pride, walking with the grace and absolute confidence of a queen. Men stepped aside out of respect and out of fear, because they all knew the truth. Enzo Ferraro ruled Chicago, but Lydia Greco ruled the monster. And heaven help the fool who ever tried to cross her again. If you survived this descent into the dark and dangerous world of the Chicago Syndicate, hit that like button to show your loyalty. Did you love watching Lydia prove her strength? Or were you cheering when Enzo finally unleashed his dark side to save her? Let us know your favorite intense moment in the comments below. Do not forget to share this gripping Mafia romance with your friends and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss our next thrilling story.